Let's get straight to our top story. Media cluelessness about President Trump. It was on full display during President Trump's first joint news conference earlier today.
Mr. President, you've said before that torture works. You've praised Russia. You've said you want to ban some Muslims from coming to America. You've suggested there should be punishment for abortion. For many people in Britain, those sound like alarming beliefs. What do you say to our viewers at home who are worried about some of your views and worried about you becoming the leader of the free world?
You said you'd help us with a Brexit trade deal. You said you'd stand by us with NATO. But how can the British Prime Minister believe you? Because you have been known in the past to change your position on things.
Now, do you need any more evidence that the media is still totally out of touch with what President Trump is trying to do? Joining us now with reaction from the White House, Kellyanne Conway, senior advisor to President Trump. Kellyanne, start with that. The media, the left, people just don't get Donald Trump. What's taking them so long to embrace this guy?
Very few people really in the media have made the adjustment from primary candidate Trump to nominee Trump to President-elect Trump to now President Trump. All the stories sound the same to many of us, where, as that BBC reporter today did, they just rehash their list of grievances and pretend it's in the form of a question. And I'm very happy that President Trump did not answer every piece of her question, because it was inappropriate to ask that at a time when Prime Minister May was standing right next to him and they were talking about NATO. They were talking about bilateral trade agreements. Prime Minister May, her Prime Minister, had just talked about what a special relationship the UK and the US have, and that both President Trump and Prime Minister May are bent on making sure that special relationship is reflected in their respective administrations. They both came into office in very similar ways. You had Brexit in the UK, and you, of course, had this unbelievable and stunning election result here in the US. I think people didn't see it coming. You know, all we ever hear, Eric, is that this country is so divided, we're so divided. Then why in the world did not enough people, and those who are in charge of informing the public, actually entertain the possibility that in the so-called divided country, the other one of the two candidates might just win? Doesn't that make mathematical sense? And so whether it's the Twitter feeds with the snark, the eye rolling, the congenitally negative descriptors that are used towards the president, and really just the kinds of questions that are shouted out at a press conference. Look, I'm a very open press person, that's obvious. I believe in a fair and free press, and with that comes responsibility. We believe in being challenged on the issues and otherwise. But there's a big difference between that and just believing that the job is to play gotcha and to always find something negative. I would just say one thing. He has gone at such a big pace this week. It's been action and impact all week long by President Trump, action and impact, that people are starting to get spoiled. They'll ask, well, when is he going to do this? Why didn't he do that? Where is this? Where is that? In a White House that is known for, you know, not such a more lethargic, I think, molasses-like pace in some of these executive orders.
That brings up the question, can he keep this pace up? And will he keep this pace up?
Yes, he will, because there's so much more to do, as you know. Many of these were things that he promised, plans that he laid out in the campaign, and people seem shocked that he's actually following through on them. I don't think Washington is accustomed to somebody who's just been a brilliant businessman, who's accustomed to delivering and producing results, who's accountable to, in this case, the people. And the other thing, I think, the point that Steve Bannon and others have made, it's a point I made to Anderson Cooper a couple weeks ago, it's a point I made to Chuck Todd last Sunday, but it doesn't get covered, just two words get covered, which tells you something else about bias. It's the point I keep making, which is, it's time to learn the American people the way Donald Trump knows them. He obviously knew something about the American people that many in the media missed. You know, you want to see facts, I'll show you headline after headline, story after story. Hillary Clinton will win. She will take the House and Senate with her. She will win 350 electoral votes. It will be historic. She doesn't even say Donald Trump's name anymore because it's a joke. And, you know, there we were going into states based on our own data. It wasn't a big mystery. Going into states with our two greatest assets, Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and having them visit those states to make a difference and eventually win them. But why don't we at least admit that if you didn't understand America, go out there and talk to America. Stop talking to yourselves and go and learn from the country.
Right.
What motivated them and what they expect from this administration. I've been a pollster for 28 years. That's what we do for a living. We get out of the major cities. We go out into and talk to people.
You did.
A huge benefit.
You did what Hillary Clinton didn't do and ended up winning the election. Kellyanne,
let me just say something about that too. I mean, I think also it's always what I call the presumptive negativity. And if you go back to the campaign, you're about to make the point, Eric, that Hillary Clinton said, Turn Texas blue. Her team said, we're going after Georgia and Arizona. So everybody followed the story, chased the story. No evidence of that at all. And it turns out Hillary Clinton spent more money in Georgia, Arizona than she did in Michigan and Wisconsin. We didn't make that mistake. We didn't give in to the constant mockery and insults. We were impervious to our naysayers and critics and won. And I think that's just the point people are making in moving forward. If we've moved forward, if we've looked past a lot, if we always have our cheeks turned, then it's high time those who have, punched us in the gut again and again try to do the same.
All right, Kellyanne, point out the dizzying pace on last Friday, Obamacare repeal, Monday, TPP withdrew, freezing on federal hiring, Wednesday, the border wall. Today, you signed some executive orders on immigration. Tell us about, first of all, we'll get to what they entail, but listen to what Governor Malloy had to say about what you guys are up to. Listen.
We should not be discriminating against refugees based on what their religion is. It's against our Constitution. It's against the fabric of who we are and what we are. And quite frankly, if you look at the criminal history of refugees, it's a lot less than the criminal history of people born in this country.
Now, Kellyanne, I have the executive order in my hand. I read through this. I don't see you guys pointing out anyone by religion. It looks like by origin, national origin, right?
Well, it's actually extreme vetting based on a country's history of exporting and training and harboring terrorists. The president said very clearly today at the Pentagon, I was right there, he said this executive order is meant to protect our nation from terrorists. I don't know who can disagree with that in premise. And in effect, it means those countries that have this history. And he also said, he signed 2 executive orders today after he oversaw the swearing in of our 26th Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, who will be an incredible Secretary of Defense. The president signed 2 executive orders. One was to enhance and expand the military, give our brave men and women in uniform the tools they need so that there is no doubt around this globe that we are the most prepared, toughest force and defense in the world, but we're also people who pursue peace. We want peace first, but we are ready to defend our country, our people, our interests, and our allies here and abroad. Secondly, the extreme vetting, where he says we're going to stop radical Islamic terrorists. In fact, we're going to eradicate them from the earth. This is actually novel for a commander-in-chief and a president of the United States and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, none of whom were willing to say radical Islamic terrorism. Basically, the proverbial eye roll with, well, what good would it do to name them? It does a heck of a lot of good to name them because Americans are tired of watching the bloodletting in Brussels, in Paris, in Nice, certainly, and then, of course, here at home on our own soil. And so it's very difficult to argue with a president who, at the end of week 1, is capping off an incredible week of action impact by saying to Americans, I want to protect us from radical Islamic terrorism. And it's very narrowly prescribed. It will be very narrowly prescribed according to those that fit the criteria I just laid out.
One of the sections of this executive order, you talk about supporting U.S. Constitution over religious edicts. I thought that was very interesting. Kellyanne, before we go to break, I want to talk about this a little bit. There was an hour conversation with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto today. And I know President Trump was asked about this with Theresa May earlier, but he said he didn't want to talk about the pay-fors, but who's going to pay for the wall? When will we know the specifics of a pay-for the border wall?
Well, we'll know when it's been decided, but those things need to be negotiated. They need to be, the consequences need to be weighed. And this is one thing I'll say about all the action statements and executive orders from this week, including that hour-long conversation this morning. Nothing that President Trump does is ceremonial. It's all consequential. That's what I mean by action and impact, and that includes the phone call. We don't have those solutions right now. I think it would be irresponsible to have those solutions in stone right now because it's a very complicated process.
Is he open to it, though, Kellyanne? Is he at least open to it, to work with President Trump on how Mexico is going to pay?
Well, I don't speak for the Mexican president, but the American president is open to a number of different solutions, a number of different options when it comes to paying for that wall. But look, think about what the wall really is. It represents, and it is indeed, a physical wall on the southern border, maybe 2,000 miles long. And what it is we're trying to take corrective action of years, if not decades, of just looking the other way, of people and drugs pouring over the border, of us being a sovereign nation without borders that are the physical barriers of sovereignty. We spend billions of dollars protecting other nations' borders, and yet not our own. So when you're talking about that type of corrective action, and frankly, Eric, you're talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars we spend, or probably more, on accommodating illegal immigration. You're talking about a very modest sum of money, relatively speaking, when it comes to our safety and security. Plus, there's a $60 billion trade deficit with Mexico.
Right.
And the Mexican president knows that. He knows that the #1 source of revenue going into Mexico is money coming from Mexicans being in America and sending it back to their home country. And he's got a lot on the line here. And I don't think the peso did very well
no, the peso actually has had a really rough go since he canceled
look at the Dow Jones in comparison. It turns out markets like action and impact by their president.